thank you for joining me in this webinar. And this is my first webinar, so I hope it goes well. I want to talk about my experience as an interviewer. This year, at the beginning of 2018, one of my goals was to start a podcast. And I did. I did at the beginning of the year, January, I did my first podcast, and I started approaching people in order to interview them and to record our interviews and put them in iTunes, in Google Podcasts, in YouTube, Spotify, and many other platforms. So far, since January 1st until today, I have done 60 recorded interviews. They can all be found in Apple Podcasts or many other venues. And in addition to that, I have done 5 live interviews at the club. I'm part of the Guillot Toastmaster Club, and I have invited writers, speakers, people with some kind of influence or something to share. I have invited them to our club, and I have done live interview in front of an audience. So all that to say, where does my experience as an interviewer come from? Now, why do interviews? What is it that you can gain from doing interview? Well, for one thing, you get to speak to people who you admire. So let's say you are in whatever industry, let's say the restaurant industry or the sport industry, and you want to get in touch with people who are leaders in that industry. Well, you get to ask them for an interview. You could get, let's say you are in the sport industry, you can ask athletes to do an interview with you, and most likely, at least my success rate when I ask people for interview is about 50%. So let's say out of 10 emails that I send, I get 5 answers, and all of them are definitely yes. Some of them are yes, some of them later on, some of them are no right now. But anyways, people seem to be generous with their time. So I get to speak to people that I admire. In particularly, I try to communicate with authors in the business community, people who write books about investments, about life improvements, things of that nature. So yeah, so I get to speak to people that I admire. And if you were going to start interviewing people in whatever your industry is, you too will be able to speak to people that you admire. Other thing is, let's say you have a business, okay, and then you let's say you sell athletic shoes for one thing, and then you interview athletes. Now there's a relationship of that athlete with your business. Or in my case, well, I do interviews with business leaders, and I have a website. Now my website is have more brand recognition by association. So those are some of the advantages that a person can get by interviewing. Another thing is our communication skill. The reason why we joined Toastmaster is to improve our communication skill. And by having an interview, you learn the art of listening, okay? So when you're having an interview, the person you are interviewing, he's telling you something, and you have to listen in order to follow up that conversation. You have to be quick in your thoughts in order to, okay, so he answers this. There are 3 different questions that I could answer, that I could ask as a follow-up from his answer. So that ability to think fast on your feet is something that you develop also as an interviewer. As you can see, also you develop your vocabulary. As you do research, as you speak to people, you try to adapt to their field of expertise, and your vocabulary continue increasing. Your self-confidence. When you speak to several well-known writers, speakers, top leaders, and that becomes a habit for you, then your self-confidence increase. And well, we all can use a little bit of self-confidence. And another thing is, to do an interview, you don't need a college degree. You don't need permission from who we call the permission giver. So in my career as a podcaster, I have even written emails to Hillary Clinton, President Obama, and I just write the emails to that, and no one has to give me permission. I just write the emails. If they accept, they accept. If they don't accept, they don't accept. But you don't need a degree. You don't need, of course, you need Toastmasters to increase your communication skill, but other than that, you don't need permission from anybody else. So this is some of the things that some of the great advantages that you can get from interviewing people. Now, why would someone accept an interview with you? What is it in there for the interviewee? How can they benefit from being interviewed? Well, for one thing, being interviewed is one of the best way to stroke somebody's ego. So if I would ask to you, whoever is listening, hey, can I interview you? Can you tell me more about your business, about how you succeed in life, about how you deal with this and other situation? That is a little bit of a stroke of your ego. You feel good because somebody is interested in what you have to say. So that is number one. So you stroke people's ego by interviewing them. Another thing is that it serves as a way to communicate their product or service. For example, I interview a financial planner, okay, so around the month of June, and I ask him questions that his clientele would probably ask him. I ask him, hey, what are the most common questions your client asks you, okay? And during the interview, I asked him those questions, and he said, you know what? I'm going to take this interview, and whenever a client has questions for me, I'm just going to send him this audio file, and that person can find out how is it that I operate, and you know they can listen, they can see it in YouTube or whatever. So the financial planner is answering all kind of questions, even without, you know, from different point of view that the client may have. So that also helps the interviewee. Another benefit that the interviewee gets is exposure. It doesn't matter how small is my audience, okay? But let's say my audience is 5. Let's say my audience is my mother, my 2 friends, and my girlfriend, okay? So that's 4 people. Those are 4 people who were not aware of the brand, of the name of the person that I am interviewing. So it doesn't matter how small is my audience. They benefit from a little bit more exposure. And another benefit that interviewees get is what is called search engine optimization. So what that means is when I write an interview, I create a website or a web page where I said I interview such and such person, and I link to their website. Now, this linking from my website to their website, that is great currency in internet, in the internet world. When websites connect, several websites to connect to somebody else's website, that increases their traffic. So those are the ways that an interviewee can benefit from being interviewed. So stroke their ego, an opportunity to explain the idea, exposure, and SEO ranking. Now, how do you get someone to do an interview with you? Okay, so we assume that you have a field of expertise or a field of interest, and so you already have certain amount of knowledge of the topic that you want to talk about. Okay, so you probably are part of a community. Like, for example, being part of Toastmasters is a community. There you may get to know people who you may want to interview, but a source of people to interview is social media. I follow almost all the people that I admire, that I'm interested in talking to, in LinkedIn and Twitter. Those seems to be the ones that work the best for me. But let's say you are in fashion, maybe Instagram would be best for you, or athletics or dancing or whatever. So for me, it's LinkedIn and Twitter that work well. Also, I have found guests from TED Talks. I have listened to speeches, and then I have approached the people who had done the TED Talks, and I have asked them. And so far, I think I have interviewed 5 TED Talk speakers. Podcasts. I listen to other podcasts, and people who have done other podcasts, well, they're already open to this idea of being interviewed, and many of them say yes. Newspaper. If I see a story about someone and the story sounds interesting, then I have contacted them, and I have contacted 2 persons through the newspaper. So those are many ways that you can get in touch with people that you are interested in interviewing. So you apply those principles to whatever industry you are, whatever field, and yeah, the thing is to always be open for new information, always be in the lookout. One great moment to ask people for interview is whenever they are trying to promote something. So in my case, I ask people for interview whenever they are promoting a book or a new product or a new service. So in those occasions, even the person with the highest following or the highest amount of fame, at those moments, they are crazy to do interview with whoever asked them to do an interview. So be on the lookout for people who are promoting their products or service in any particular way. Now, you may ask, okay, so what are the tools that I can use? What is the gear? We all have practically one of these. This is a cell phone, and you can see there's a camera there, there's a microphone. So this thing already is a great tool for doing podcasts. One thing that I use is that I have an external microphone that I can connect to my phone, and now I have 2 amazing tools to do podcast. I use my phone sometimes as a video camera or sometimes as a microphone to interview people and interview their audio. But of course, I have other equipments. I have a professional microphone as well. I use Skype. Skype is great. Almost everyone has Skype to communicate. Now, today, I learned how to use Zoom. So I'll be using Zoom for other podcasts in the future. How do you record those conversations? Well, we spoke about the phone, the camera, but also there is a software, free software that you can use for your computer called Audacity. And if you have a Mac computer, there is GarageBand, I believe that you can use to record sound. So those are mediums. So most of us already have the tools to record an interview. And of course, there is the old-fashioned note-taking, where you interview someone and take notes. So we have the tools. The tools are available to all of us. We don't have to invest a great amount of money. My microphone, this microphone probably cost me, I forgot, $40, $50 in Amazon. And the smartphone, we already have one of them, almost all of us. Okay, so now you have done your research, you have found someone to interview, and you have the gear. Now, what's next? Okay, so let's say I'm going to interview, let's say President Obama or Richard or Warren Buffett. Okay, so now what is the research that I do? Well, I go to all social media first. So in Facebook, if they have a Facebook account, they post information about their family. Sometimes those Facebook profiles are private, so maybe sometimes it's not available. But definitely LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great source of information. Their website, if they have a business or if they're promoting something, everything that they care about promoting is in their website, at least if their website is up to date. Previous interviews or speeches. So we can go into YouTube, for example, and YouTube is a great source of information as well. Or Apple Podcasts, you go there and it has a search engine that gives you practically any interview that they have done in audio. And another way to research, let's say, is for someone who have never done an interview, is having a pre-interview conversation. So let's say I'm going to interview Greg Senior, and he has never done an interview, then I say, hey, Craig, can we have a phone, 15-minute conversation over the phone to go over the kind of questions I could ask you in an interview. And at that time, we will see what is it, what kind of information he's willing to share, and what is in particularly that we will speak about. Now, when doing an interview, the best thing to do is to be over prepared. If you think you're going to have a 15-minute conversation, then prepare a half an hour conversation. If you're going to have a half an hour conversation, then prepare a whole hour conversation. It has happened that the best thing that could happen to you is that you ask a question and your interviewee give you a nice long answer with details and this and that. But there are also interviewees that give you short answers. Recently, I interviewed a woman who is a female bodyguard in England, and I interviewed her about the bodyguard industry and how does it affect women, how is it, yes, it's an industry that is uncommon for a woman. So I interviewed her, and I guess because she's from the military or from the police, she was used to giving short, minimal answers. So I did my preparation for about 2 hours of questions, and we just went them very fast because all her answers were short, precise, and she just didn't add anything of extra information. So having lots of questions prepared and doing a lot of background research is very useful. So we have to always prepare. Now, let's say you are going to do an interview. Once again, I'm going to do an interview with Craig Sr. And he say, okay, yes, sure, no problem. Then I have to prepare my guest. First of all, I have to let him know through our written communications or whatever form of communication that this is a friendly interview. I'm there to try to promote him, to try to put him in the best possible light. And that will make my interviewee feel friendly, open, and he would like to share as much information as possible. Also, it's good to prevent a guess on the amount of time that we will do the interview. So if it's half an hour, then I will try to respect that time period and not go over it. But it's good for the guests so they can planify their day. Or sometimes you could say, well, I'm planning to interview you for half an hour, but if you could spare a few more minutes, maybe if we go longer. So if you prevent your guests for that, then they could leave their schedule open for another 15 minutes if that's needed. So some guests, they want to know, okay, what are you going to ask me? What I want to prepare myself. So for those guests, I try to give them prepared questions. So some prepared questions are, for example, who are you and what do you do? So this gives the guest the opportunity to start speaking about themselves in what we call at Toastmasters an icebreaker. So they say, okay, so my name is blah, blah, blah. I grew up in Quebec City. I study chemistry, whatever. And then and then my follow-up question, and these are questions that I give to guests who are a little bit shy, who want to prepare themselves. How do you get into your field of expertise? So they tell a story of how is it that they got into their field of expertise. And then if they are promoting a product or a service, then I ask them, okay, so can you tell us more about your book, your film, your service, your whatever that you are trying to promote? And then what's next in your life? Okay, you succeeded, you published this book, people love you. Now, what are your next plans? And then the final question is, how can people find out more about you? And this is the moment where they say, okay, so people can buy my book in Amazon, they can go to my website, and they can follow my Twitter links or my website or my newsletters or or whatever they want. Everyone wants a little bit of attention, and they want to have a following, so they will share that information with the listener at that time. Now, before an interview, let's say I'm going to have an interview. Once again, Craig, I'm using you as an example. I'm going to have an interview with Craig Sr. And right before the interview, I say, okay, listen, we try to have a small talk, like how's your day? Just make that relationship. So start with small talk, try to make people feel comfortable, break the ice, and then also tell them, listen, if you need to take a break, I can always edit the audio or the video, if someone knocks on the door. So if you say something that you change your mind and want me to take it back, then feel free to tell me. So whenever I say that to a person that I am interviewing, then they feel more comfortable knowing that, they can let their guard down and they can share more information. Now, during an interview, of course, is the icebreaker, tell me a little bit about yourself, your past. Then I also like to share snippets of my life. Okay, so, oh, yeah, that's funny. That happens to me in this occasion. Oh, yes, I can relate to what you're saying because of this and this other circumstances. But be conscious. You just want to share a little bit of yourself, not much, not because you want to be guarding the information about you. It's because you want your guest to be the star. If you have a one hour with an important guest, you don't want to waste half of that hour talking about yourself. That will be for another occasion, but this is a service that you are doing for your guests and for your audience. So you want both your guests to get to explain his point of view as much as possible, and your audience to get to listen to your guests. You can later on, you can talk to your audience about what is it that you like or don't like. You can talk more about yourself, but don't take that time away when you have an important guest in your interview. Also, and I have seen this so many times, people that have a particular format. So they have 5 questions and they're always the same questions and they don't break away from those questions. And sometimes guests open the door for an amazing follow-up that goes into a different conversation. But if you are a slave to your 5 questions, what I'm trying to say is don't become a slave to your questions. Be open to the opportunities that your guest provides you. For example, I spoke to a gang member. This is a person who did 20 years in penitentiary, and then he got out, and then he started a non-profit organization to help other ex-convicts. Okay, so this person shared a lot about his life, shared about how at the age of 7 he was sexually molested, and now he went into the life of crime, and then how was his life in penitentiary. This person, I want to any opportunity that he can give me to share more details of his life, I took that opportunity. I just don't like to get caged in standard questions. So if a person is sharing something interesting, deviate from your main program and let that person express those new doors that he's opening. Another trick to interview people, of course, is to ask open-ended questions. So how did that make you feel? Or what is your opinion about this subject? So try as much as possible not to ask questions that can be answered with a yes or a no. Just questions where a person, the guest, can express his ideas and explain a little bit further. At the same time, if a guest is drifting too far from your subject, let's say your subject is about personal finance, and then you guys start talking about fashion, well, try to find a way to bring him back to the main topic, okay? But so this is the things that a person has to learn by doing interviews, by talking to people, how to keep those open, but not to let them get too far away from the main topic of conversation. Another tip to have this kind of conversation is not to be afraid of silence. So let's say I ask Craig a question and he doesn't answer right away. So I just keep that silence and let him think. Let's say, let's keep some silence. So we all feel tempted to feel that silence. But if you are asking an open-ended question, most likely the person that you are interviewing will finally come up with an answer. So if you ask a question, just keep that silence for as long as it takes, and let the person that you're interviewing break that silence. You don't break it. Now, after the interview, this is extremely important. Make sure that all the information is properly saved. So let's say you did an interview with your camera or your phone or whatever. Make sure you put it in that file that you created is in a safe place. The worst thing that could happen is to lose that information and then to have to come back and say, hey, can I interview you again because I lost your information? No, you want to, as soon as an interview is over, whether it's notes, whether it's video, whether it's a audio recording, you want to put it in a safe place in your hard drive or your memory device and make sure it's not going to get lost. Another important thing, of course, is after an interview to go out of the way and thank the person who gave you their 30 minutes or the 1 hour or the 15 minutes of their time. Okay, so you write a message, an email, or whatever means of communication, and just show how appreciative you are of that time that they give you. Once an interview is done, whether it's audio, video, or whatever, then editing has to be done. So let's say I interview someone by email, okay? So I ask 5 standard questions and they answer me and they have spelling mistakes in that conversation. Of course, I would take out those spelling mistakes. I wouldn't publish that with a spelling mistake. So the same thing will be done with an audio interview or with a video interview. As much as is possible, or as much as the technology allows you, or your knowledge of editing allows you, try to edit out those little mistakes. For example, when I do a podcast interview, my guest stumbles a lot. He goes, ooh, and he's thinking out loud and have these crutch words that we try so hard in Toastmaster to eliminate from our vocabulary. Well, not everyone is a Toastmaster member, so a lot of people use in the regular vocabulary, you know. So if you have the knowledge to edit out those crutch words, then that's a favor that you are doing to the person that you are interviewing and to the audience. The audience doesn't need to listen to 100 times during the interview. You can do them a favor by taking those out of the conversation, and you are making your guests shine, making them feel good. And another thing that happens when you interview someone and they feel proud of the conversation that they had is that they share that interview. And that's one great advantage that you could have. Let's say, once again, I interview Craig Sr., and he stumbles a little bit, but I edit all that out, and he sounds like a champion Toastmaster. Okay, now he's going to be proud of that interview, and he's going to share it with his friends and family and whatever. So that makes him look good, and that makes you, the interviewer, look good. And then other people will feel comfortable and happy to do an interview with you. So editing is very important. Don't think you are cheating the public by not giving the 100% unadulterated truth. You are doing a favor to everyone. Take out whatever mistakes there are, and of course, all that within your possibilities. If you don't know how to edit sound out or answer ums or mishaps in a video, then you are working within your possibilities. Don't worry about that. Having a website is very important. because in addition to an audio file or a video file, having the notes or a summary of what have been covered in a conversation is very important. Let's say that in this interview, I just gave you a resource, which is Audacity. Audacity is the audio software that I use to record my conversation, okay? So you listen to that, but then you have a hard time. You didn't know whether I pronounced it correctly or you understood it correctly. But if I have a show notes, if I write those resources or points of our conversations, like the most important things that I mention and links to the resources and the web pages and whatever, then you as the listener, if that information interests you, then you can go back and check it out, and that helps out. It becomes an additional tool of the information of the interview. And okay, so we have editing of the interview, we have the notes, and now links to websites. So if as part of Toastmaster, if you have a website, Toastmaster website, you know that one of the things that bring up your ranking in the internet is by having other websites linking to you. So whenever I do an interview, I make sure to link to my guest website, and that is a currency in the internet terms of itself. That is very valuable in internet. So I do a podcast episode or interview, a YouTube interview with Mr. Craig Sr., and then I put in the show notes, okay, so this is what we spoke about, and these are the links to Craig's website. So that itself, that becomes a way of paying back for that favor, for that for the time that my guests gave me to be interviewed. So yes, that's your currency, your payback. So you stoke their egos, you bring them exposure, and you also interlink to the website, so there is search engine optimization ranking goes up. So now, after I have done the podcast or the interview, I want to publish it. So when I publish an episode, an interview, I try to publish it in as many mediums of communication as possible. I have to my disposal, I have Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, I have YouTube, Spotify, Pandora, and I forgot. I think I have a few more. I have all that automatized. So when I publish, it goes to all these different sources: LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Google Plus. So you want, after someone gave you their time, they don't want that conversation to be stored in a hard drive somewhere. That they want that conversation to be public. So of course you want to just not use one means of publication. You want to use as many means of publication, and this is your job as an interviewer, to find out how you can promote your guests as much as possible. They give you their time, they give you their expertise. Now you fulfill your part, which is making that interview be known and making them look as best as possible, and to give great value to the audience, to the people who are reading your material, to the people who are looking at you, to the people who are listening to you. So once an interview has been published, it is your job to just disseminate that information as much as possible. So that's it on interviewing people. That's if I don't know if you have any questions, please let me know.
I found that absolutely fascinating. I didn't actually know that was the topic of the webinar. Okay. I thought it was about being an interviewee. So that was absolutely fascinating.
Well, yeah, in no matter which area you are, this is a great way to build influence. Let's say, in which field do you work?
Well, I work in the retail field, but I mean, it would be great to just build influence within Toastmasters, because I have tons of educationals that I've given that I could easily make accessible to a lot more people. So,
well, for example, this conversation is going to be published through the webinar, but it could be also published in YouTube, and it could be separated, the video from the audio, and also be transformed into a podcast episode, which will go into iTunes, or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Spotify is big, and people do listen. Me, for example, I get about 1,000 listeners every month, and I only started this year.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think too, the new Pathways program is a lot more oriented towards, digital media and social media. So this is an excellent angle on using it properly.
Yes, I think in the pathways there is something about podcasts. I did see it, and there is also about creating blog posts, which is also a means of communication. It's how we communicate nowadays to an audience. It has been a fantastic experience. As I said, I have never done a webinar before, and you helped me a lot. Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for asking me.
yeah, Alain, you did a fantastic job. Well done.
Good night.
Thanks again, Alain.